80-20 is the most powerful thing that your high school teacher never told you about. There's an 80-20 inside every 80-20. So if you run the numbers, 1% of what you did last year produced half of your income.
Hey, Perry, welcome to the show.
Good to be here. Thank you for having me on. We're going to have a rocking time today.
Cool, there you go. Now they're expecting stuff now. Never start a conversation like that. I actually started the conversation with you before we came on, saying that you had kept on popping up in my feed, my conversations, and my attention as the 80-20 man. And, Josh Felber and a few other people that I know you've been on their shows. But let's jump into the deep end. You've got this book, and it's the 80-20 on sales and marketing. And there's a lot of people that talk about you. Dan Kennedy talks about you. So if anyone's out there thinking, Steve, why should I listen to this guy? Dan does. So what is the 80-20?
80-20 is literally the most powerful thing in business. And it's the most revolutionary concept that, for the most part, they never teach you in school. Cause and effect are radically unequal, and it's been drilled into our heads to treat everything equal. So what's a straight A student? It's a person who's good at everything. But if you want to make money in business, you need to be good at one thing or just a few things for just a few certain kind of people. And it's not about everything. So let me tell you an 80-20 story. I have a very good friend named John Paul Mendoza, and when he was 17, he dropped out of high school, moved to Las Vegas, got a fake ID, and became a professional gambler. And after a few weeks of playing poker with his fake ID, he was like, this is a little harder than I thought it was going to be. And so he goes to a gambling bookstore, and he runs into this guy named Rob, and he finds out that Rob is a professional gambler. And he goes, "Can you teach me how to do what you do?" And Rob goes, "For a percentage of your winnings, I can teach you what I do." And so they shake on it. "Jump in the Jeep, John. We're going for a ride." So they've got a business agreement. They're going down the highway. John says, "So how do I win more poker games?" And Rob says, "You need to play people who are going to lose. And those people are called marks." It's the kid from Wichita who just got off the airplane with $5,000, his grandmother's inheritance money. You want that guy. He goes, "Well, where do I find more of that guy?" And he goes, "Here, I'll show you." And he pulls into a parking lot of a strip club, and they walk into a strip club, and there's girls and there's music and there's bikers, and he sits John down at a table, and he pulls a sawed-off shotgun out of his jacket, holds it under the table, opens it up, and then slams it shut in the middle of this noisy club. And all these biker dudes turn around, they're like, "Hey, what's that?" And the owner comes over to the table. He goes, "What's going on over here?" "Nothing's going on. We're not going to cause any trouble. Just teaching the lad a lesson." "John, did you notice those biker dudes when I made that noise?" And he goes, "Yeah." And he goes, "Don't play poker with them. They're not marks. Play poker with everybody else." And that is what we call racking the shotgun in everything you do in sales, in everything you do in marketing. Is rack the shotgun. You record the podcast episode. Some people listen and some people don't. That's racking the shotgun. You send the email. Some people open it, some people don't. Some people click, some people don't. Some people get on the Zoom call, some people don't. Some people buy, some people don't. In every one of those things, roughly speaking, is 80-20, meaning that 80% of the action comes from 20% of the people. And the other 20% of the action comes from 80% of the people, which means the action versus the not action is 16-1. The haves versus the have-nots is 16 to 1. This is true in customer databases. It's true in Facebook ads. It's true in podcasts. It's true in billionaires. It's true in real estate. It's true all over the place. It is incredibly consistent. And when I realized, it was about 20 years ago, I finally got it. Like, I'd been told about 80-20 before. I kind of knew. Most people have kind of heard about this. When I got it, I was like, wait a minute. You can predict all kinds of stuff. So, for example, the 80-20 rule says that 80% of the money wants to come from 20% of the people. And 80% of 80% of the money wants to come from 20% of the 20% of the people. So I created this thing. It's called the principle of the $2,700 espresso machine. For every 1,000 people who buy a $5 latte, one of them will buy a gleaming stainless steel $2,700 espresso machine. It's basically a law of physics. But a coffee shop that does not know that will never, they'll probably never even make a profit, because all the lattes do is get people in the door and keep the lights on, but all the profit is in the espresso machine.
So you focused a lot of the science on this. When did you realize that? Because we've heard this 80-20 rule, millions of times. It's nothing new, but often overlooked and ignored. When did you start calculating the science of it, and how can we use that to relate to attracting the clients we want?
The epiphany was, I was reading Richard Koch's original 80-20 book, and he just mentioned once early in the book that 80-20 had to do with chaos theory, and then he went on and he never mentioned it again. And I'm like, whoa, I'm an engineer, I'm a geek. I studied chaos theory. I'm like, wait a minute. So this is the science of sand dunes and avalanches and cracks in windshields. And the thing about chaos theory is it's the same patterns, like whether you have a pebble or a planet, like they're both rocks. And 80-20 is the math of how big the rocks are and how many there are. And I jumped up in the middle of the coffee shop on page 14 of this book. I'm like, wait a minute, is this really true? I had been a freelance consultant at that point in time for a year and a half. And anybody who's listening, who's self-employed, knows what life is like a year and a half into your first business. Like you're scrambling around, you're trying to figure stuff out. It's kind of starting to work. And I thought, wait a minute, that means every number in this business is 80-20. And I went home. I'm like, okay, so I got this many visitors to my website. I have these many people who signed up. I have this many paying clients. I have this many people who hired me to do consulting work. And it was 80-20. I'm like, wait a minute. So I can use this to figure out where missing pockets of money are. I can also use it to predict things like, you can be certain that 20% of the product defects cause 80% of your returns. You don't have to fix every problem with your product. You need to fix 20% of the problems with your product, and you will have dealt with 80% of it. And it also means you don't treat customers equally. You give much more attention to a very small percentage of customers and less attention to everybody else. And that's actual real equality in the is world as opposed to the should be world. And so when I started changing this, I started getting sales funnels to work that wouldn't work before. I started realizing that if I have problem customers, I could just fire a customer. I could do it politely. It doesn't have to be a fight, but I can get rid of them, move them out the back door and not have to deal with them. And really 80-20 says you should wake up every morning and focus on just the 20% that matters. And the 80% of what you do really doesn't matter that much at all. Doesn't make that much difference. And frankly, a lot of it you don't have to do.
Okay. All right. So the is world. I like that. I like that stuff. You know, how it actually is rather than how it, should be. And we'd all love it to be. And you're right. There's all this kind of talk about equality, but in any planet, what is equality? It always leans to someone being more equal than others. And now you're focusing that on giving it to the 80% to the 20% that deserve. You wrote the book on this. It's 80-20 sales and marketing. So for a start, let's not wait until the end. How can people look up the book? Because I believe they get some special perks if they go to your website. Is that correct to grab it?
Yes. If you go to perrymarshall.com/podcast, we sell the book. In the US, it's $7, including shipping. Outside the US, it's $14, whereas in Amazon, it'd be 20 some. And we add some extra videos and some extra tools because 80-20 is the most powerful thing that your high school teacher never told you about. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. So 80% of the traffic runs on 20% of the roads, and 80% of the real estate is owned by 20% of the people, and 20% of the clients give you 80% of your revenue. And not only that, it's a pattern inside a pattern inside a pattern. So there's an 80-20 inside every 80-20. So if you run the numbers, it means 5% of what you did last year produced 2/3 of your income, and 1% of what you did last year produced half of your income. If you're a salesperson or if you're self-employed, you could stop and think about this. Half of your income last year you earned in about 3 or 4 days. And the other half of your income you earned like all the other 365 days a year. But there was a few conversations, a few deals, a few decisions, a very few negotiations, a very few, maybe it's one certain web page or one certain podcast or one certain key partner that produced almost all of the benefit, and you spent all kinds of other time chasing other things that didn't produce anything. That's the truth. This is everybody.
I'm interrupting this podcast for 35 seconds to give you more value. If you are an ambitious entrepreneur looking for the opportunity in everything you come across, don't just listen to this podcast. Imagine taking part in these conversations every week. Imagine having a new network of creative and disruptive entrepreneurs to support and push you into becoming the person you can be. With this high level and exclusive community, it exists. Head to simsdistillery.com to learn more. You said, and my son's just the same, and he has these kind of conversations that kind of send me off to some kind of comatose state. You've got that energy, the engineer analytical mindset.
Yeah.
So you can look at something and calculate and quantify how it's working and how it should. My concern here is, have you written an engineering book, or have you written a book that's going to be easy for me to understand, not only understand and digest, but action? Or do I need to go to Harvard's engineering department just to be able to facilitate this?
It is an easy book to read. If you want the engineering, there's an appendix, and you can go, and it's got all the math stuff in it. But so let's make it really simple. If you hire 10 salespeople, 2 of them, I guarantee you, will outsell the other 8. And it's a law of physics that this is going to happen. And what most people will do is they'll get a baby bottle and they'll get some formula and they'll try to help the weak salespeople. And come on, can I help you out here? And they'll spend all this time pushing a noodle, and nothing will happen. You know what you should do? When you interview them, you should say, we're going to try you out for 2 weeks. And you know, if it doesn't work, it's no harm, no foul, no shame. We're just going to see how you do. And you hire 10 people expecting you're going to get rid of 6 or 7 of them after 2 weeks. And you just make it part of the deal. And then that way you get the best salesperson. And what a lot of people do is they spend 3 months or 6 months hiring this one person. And then there's only a 20% chance that person's going to work out anyway. And then a year goes by and no progress has been made. Man, life is short. Like, we got to get stuff done.
Look, the 80-20, and we're repeating this 80-20, but there's kind of a bigger, easier problem to see here. We know about the 80-20. As we made it very obvious, this isn't new information. You've got a book that allows you to understand how to focus down on it, and you've got some extra videos and material to look at it. But one of the bigger problems I feel within the world of entrepreneurs, small business, especially when you're handling your own hiring and firing, is when to notice that 80% ain't working and getting rid of them. How do you notice? Because as you say, we straight away try to bottle feed the 80% to make them a little bit better. And as Dan Sullivan always says, if you focus on your weaknesses a lot, you end up with some really strong weaknesses.
Yeah.
So how do we notice where the 80% waste of our time is? Because as you've openly said, this isn't a rule just in staff. It's in your marketing. It's in your conversations. It's in who you network with. You'll network at a party. Only 20% of the people you speak to will be worth it. But you've got to go through that 80%. What would be really good is not to know that you're going to be wasting 80% of your time, but how to limit that 80%. How do you recognize those things?
So 80-20 means that selling anything is not a convincing people process. It means it's a disqualification process. Okay. So my friend John, the professional gambler, he came up with something called the 5 power disqualifiers, and they are always true anytime anybody sells anything to anybody. So John he left gambling. He took a regular job, and his boss said, "Hey, I got 206 leads. I want you to go meet with all of these people." John knew enough from poker to realize there's no way 206 of these people deserve an appointment. And so he came up with a list of 5 things. Do they have the money? Do they have a bleeding neck? Do they buy into your USP, unique selling proposition? Do they have the ability to say yes? Many times when you sell, you're selling to somebody who can say no, but they can't say yes. Like the husband is talking about the kitchen remodel, but his wife isn't there. That's the 4th one. The 5th one is it fits their overall plans. Those 5 things are always true every time anybody sells anything to anyone. Have the money, bleeding neck, USP, able to say yes, overall plans. So John would call these people, and he was very bold. He would go, "Do you have the budget to solve this problem? Is this really a problem?" And if they said no, at any point you go, "Okay, we're done. Thanks. Appreciate your time. Bye." And he would just stop. And he ended up meeting with 12 of them, and he closed 6. His boss would have had him driving all over Southern California for 6 months, meeting 180 people that would never buy anything. And so if you know before you go into any hiring situation, any sales situation, any marketing situation, the 80% need to be disqualified before even considering. So let's talk about jobs. You shouldn't interview people. You should audition people. Here, I'll pay you $100. I'll pay you $500. Come in here and do this and go home with your check, and we're going to watch what you do. We don't have to talk to you. Just do it. Like, if you had a band and you needed a bass player, you don't just go out to coffee and talk to people about Geddy Lee and Flea. You want to see them play the bass. The same with actors understand this, musicians understand this, but business people, they talk to people and they talk to more people and they read resumes and they read more resumes. No, it's an audition, not an interview.
All right, quick question from what you just said there. You mentioned about the bleeding neck. What do you mean by the bleeding neck?
So if you go to an emergency room with a broken arm, you think it's the end of the world. And you walk in there and they give you a clipboard and they go, here, fill this out. And you're sitting next to Better Homes and Gardens, filling out a clipboard with your one working arm. And you're like, why don't they see me right away? And then some guy with a gunshot wound goes in and blood is squirting out of his aorta. And like, he doesn't have to fill out the clipboard. Like, they just take him right in. That's what I mean by bleeding neck. Like, a person with an urgent problem. It is so much easier to sell to people who have urgent problems. And so, like, let's say you're a salesperson and you're looking for a job. You want a job where you sell to people that have urgent problems. You don't want a job selling to people who are like, well, you know, I might possibly think about contemplating 10 years from now. No, like, and when I went into sales, I got laid off from my engineering job and I didn't have any idea what I was doing. And my wife was 3 months pregnant with our first child. And it was 3 years of bologna sandwiches and ramen soup and pounding the phone and pounding the pavement. And I didn't know all this. Like, really, 80-20 Sales and Marketing is the book I wish I had read when I was 26. And nobody ever told me this stuff. Like, I didn't know that you can put your balls in a wheelbarrow and ask the prospect, do you have the budget for this? And it doesn't matter if they think you're greedy for asking them in the question or not. It's a waste of both of their time if they don't have the budget.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. I'm amazed at how many people never ask that. They go in this sale. Like I've always said, you know, if you're asking someone a question, you're either asking the wrong question or the wrong person. And you've stated quite often, there's a lot of people that can say no, but not everyone can say yes.
Right.
And there's been a lot of times that you can have absolutely great conversations with the person that wants the refit or the refurbishment or the new car, but they're not in a position because they don't have the budget. So it's not rude to ask those, can you afford this? Is this within your budget? Are you looking at doing something now, or is this something you're contemplating and preparing for the future? These are very, very easy questions that show respect for your time and the person in front of you.
When I was 26, you know what I thought sales was? Kumbaya, my lord, kumbaya. Like, you know, if they like me enough and we hold hands and we bond and we have a really great conversation, then they're going to buy. No, that's not really how it works. It's not about building rapport. It's about finding a bleeding neck and finding a person with money and putting a bold proposition in front of them and making sure they can say yes. Like, so if I show you the most amazing thing in the world today, are you the person that can cut me a purchase order? Oh, no, that's Jerry in the engineering department and the purchasing agent, Sally. Like well, let's reschedule when they can be there. Now, that it takes cojones to say something like that, especially when you're a young guy wearing a suit and you're trying to look good, smell good. But I'm telling you, money is a blood sport.
It's beautifully put. Get people a bit more direct, understand the science. Again, where can they? I've appreciated you being on the show today. I like it. I like the angle. I do like the clarification of the 80% being a disqualification technique and not just a, hey, you have to go through this shit. So again, perrymarshall.com. Is that correct?
perrymarshall.com/podcast. You can buy 80-20 Sales and Marketing for just shipping, which is $7 in the US and $14 outside. And it'll change your life. Once you see 80-20 everywhere, you won't be able to unsee it. And you'll be driving in your car, you'll be talking to your spouse, you'll be talking about 80-20 like it's the newest, biggest discovery. It's incredibly more powerful than people think it is.
Beautiful. And they give videos and some extra little perks. So
that's right.
Perry, thank you very much for having us on the show. Having on the show today. I've enjoyed the conversation, and I wish you all the best for the book.
This is a treat. Thank you for having me on.
Look after yourself. Hey, thanks for listening to the podcast. You know what to do. If you love it, share, subscribe, but more than anything, do something with it. And remember, life's too short to play it safe, so disrupt, connect, and grow. See you next time.